What's up, guys? Today I want to talk about the practice of self-acceptance and how it dissolves ego structures. And I'm going to get into like what specifically that means and really break down the words and that sort of thing. And so the first question is, what does that mean? When someone says love yourself or accept yourself, like what are they talking about? The first question that comes before that is know thyself. Because how do you know if your idea of self is actually you? Because then loving yourself and accepting yourself wouldn't actually be yourself, which is kind of against the whole point. So I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that your true self is pure, spontaneous, authentic expression. And I'm gonna give some examples of that and read some different literature to kind of back that up. The first example of this is like, you know, when you're with a good friend that you haven't seen in a long time and you've had all of these experiences that you can't wait to share with them, and it's like the words are coming out faster than you can even think about what you're saying. And at the same time, there's like this awareness in you that catches that the words are coming out faster than you can think as it's happening. So that would be a really good example of spontaneous, authentic expression. And given that this person is a really good friend to you, I'm assuming that they're not judgmental of you and they accept who you really are. And typically that's what makes people good friends. And so that lack of judgment is what creates an environment for you to express yourself spontaneously and authentically. And that's really at the core of what this practice is about. When I say self-acceptance, is getting to the point where there is no internal self-judgment and that sort of thing, so that you can express yourself spontaneously in any environment around any number of people or whatever it is. Another example is like kids at a water park, right? They're just like running around, laughing, screaming, having a great time. They're not really thinking about anything. They're just literally just pure joy and celebration and just running around and having an awesome time. That's another really good example. So with that being said, I want to share an excerpt from a book called Fear of Life by Alexander Lowen, who's the developer of bioenergetics. And this will kind of tie that together. He says, "We become afraid to love and to live, though we desperately want to do both. We can momentarily open our hearts, but we dare not keep them open. We can feel love, but we cannot express it. When one plays a role, the end result is always depression." And then he says, "One function of the role or mask is to hide from the person himself those aspects of his personality that are too painful or too frightening to be seen and confronted." And this immediately reminded me of I believe it's a Latin word, persona, which comes from, I think it's a Greek word, pursue, which goes back to like theatrical masks they used to wear. And that's actually what persona comes from, that word. And then he talks about the cost of energy to support this fake image or facade. And he says so much energy is required to maintain a role or facade that little is left for pleasure or creativity. But being is effortless because it is spontaneous and natural. And that really hits on what I'm getting at so perfectly. Because when there is no role or facade or you trying to be someone, essentially this is what the ego structures are that I'm talking about, right? Identity with ethnicity or some sort of group, or how much money you make, or what you look like, or what clothes you wear, or whatever. It's all premeditated, it's all contrived, and that doesn't allow for spontaneous expression because you're putting on a role, you're playing this, you're acting kind of as it is when you're around people, and even when you're by yourself a lot of times. So what he's really talking about is being and spontaneous expression, and it's effortless, and it allows you to have energy for creativity and pleasure. So some really good examples of what this looks like would be like, let's say you're with a group of people, it could be friends or family or whatever, and let's say something happens and it makes you laugh, it's like super funny to you, and then quickly you notice that no one else is laughing and you're the only one laughing, and you start to get this sense of like, oh, am I weird? Is there something wrong with me? Like, okay, and then you start kind of, these thoughts come up a lot of times where it's like, oh, well, I guess the people that I hang out with don't laugh at things like this, and that's not okay for me to do that, right? Ego structure. So that's one example, something that arises spontaneously and kind of blocking it. So that's kind of what I'm getting at with this practice. That's one example. Another one would be if something embarrassing happens to you, you trip and fall or something like that, and being able to not identify with the embarrassing aspect of that experience and to be able to laugh at it, to laugh at yourself and not take yourself so seriously. And then lastly, whenever a feeling of guilt comes up, or shame, or you feel awkward, a really good question to ask yourself is, how do I accept myself in this situation that makes me feel uncomfortable? And whenever a feeling of guilt comes up, or shame, or any sort of awkwardness, typically what happens is thinking starts to come up, right? And we think and we think and we think, and we kind of escape into our thinking, and we escape our body, and we escape our spontaneous expression in our body. So what I'm suggesting through this process of self-acceptance is, whenever that feeling comes up, whenever you're in a situation when you start to feel these feelings, instead of retreating into your thinking, sink into the feeling. As Eckhart Tolle says, allow the thoughts to come and go without any judgment or analysis of them, but simply sinking into the feeling that's there and breathing and being with yourself. Teal Swan, I'll put a link to these videos, but she says stop abandoning yourself. And she has an acronym for PAIN, which is pay attention, integrate, now. Really similar concept. So yeah, like I said, instead of escaping into the thinking and leaving your body, leaving your expression, and then what ends up happening is you get so lost in here that you start stuttering, and it's hard to talk to people, it's hard to approach people, you start to feel really weird. It constricts blood flow, because naturally your body wants to express itself, right? Muscles tighten up. In bioenergetics, they call this holding patterns. Whenever you want to express yourself a certain way, and then you don't, and then you constrict, and then it just stays there, and then eventually you lose feeling. That's a whole nother thing in itself. So yeah, that question, how do I accept myself in this situation that makes me feel uncomfortable? And sometimes that means getting the fuck out of there. And that's a part of this process as well. As you allow yourself to feel these feelings, instead of escaping, instead of abandoning yourself feeling these feelings, it really is learning how to listen to yourself, learning how to listen to, some would say, your inner voice or intuition. And there's tons of videos and knowledge about this, so I won't even go into that. And the last part of self-acceptance I want to touch on is accepting where you are in your path in life. Because it's very easy to be like, I'm not good enough now, but once I do this, once I achieve this thing, or accomplish this thing, or get to this place, or move to this house, or whatever, then I'll accept myself, and then I'll be fine, and then everything will be good. But life is an ever-moving path, so the practice of self-acceptance is always accepting yourself now, where you are on that path, no matter where you are. Because since the time you were born, you're already enough. There's never this, like, you get to this one point and it's like, okay, the whole life you haven't been good enough, but now you are. It's always moving. There's always going to be more. There's always going to be more to explore and unravel and discover. And I want to read one more thing, because this is multidimensional and there's another aspect to this. So Eckhart Tolle has a book called A New Earth, and I just want to read this little excerpt from this book really quick. He says, the answer is simple once you realize what the ego is and how it works. When forms that you had identified with that gave you your sense of self collapse or are taken away, it can lead to a collapse of the ego, since ego is identification with form. When there is nothing to identify with anymore, who are you? When forms around you die or death approaches, your sense of beingness of I am is freed from its entanglement with form. Spirit is released from its imprisonment in matter. You realize your essential identity as formless, as an all-pervasive presence of being prior to all forms, all identifications. You realize your true identity as consciousness itself, rather than what consciousness had identified with. That's the peace of God. The ultimate truth of who you are is not I am this or I am that, but I am. And I want to take this back to what I was talking about earlier with having a conversation with a good friend. This aspect of you, of this spontaneous expression happening through the body, and simultaneously this awareness being there, of being aware of this expression happening. With that being said, I want to wrap this whole video up by rephrasing the entire question and I guess topic or name of the video from self-acceptance, self-love, changing that to cultivating space for being to express naturally through the process of allowing spontaneous expression fully in the body. And as you allow this to flow, you're gonna see these ego structures wash away cathartically, like water running through a stream and cleansing all the dirt and dust off the rocks. Because there's no other way that it can happen. Just like Alexander Lowen says in that passage, you know? Because once you allow this spontaneous expression to flow through you, and that is essentially what it is, and you're not creating a role or a facade, or I need to be this person, or I need to act this way because whatever. There's nothing else to happen but for these ego structures to dissolve. Because you're taking out the root of their structure. And it is such a joyful experience. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If anybody liked this or found it interesting in any way, or entertaining or educational or whatever it is, please like and subscribe, and let me know what you guys think. If you have any questions or anything about this topic or things that you'd like to talk about in the future, please leave a comment. I'll try to read and respond to all of them. And I want to keep doing these videos. I'm not claiming to be like some super guru person or anything like that. I merely read a bunch of books, and I've been on my journey for a while now, and I have this sense that I need to share the perspective that's been given to me. And with that being said, I want to create this as a community where this can be a conversation, not just myself but other people that are on the same page, and bringing people on the same page as well. So with that being said, thank you guys for watching so much. Peace and love.